vast majority of projects up and running here in the state of Ohio, during these very challenging times. I know that it was really accomplished in spite of a lot of different ways of now having to do work, and also doing it with that specter of the COVID-19 virus that's been hanging over all of our heads, as far as both how we perform work and also protecting ourselves and our co-workers. I know in accomplishing all this and figuring out how to do things a different way, it really came at a price of time and efficiency, and that in our business just naturally relates to delays. And that is exactly why I think today's presentation is so timely, because we are now slowly beginning to have the governors bringing us out of this, and we need to recognize, now at this point, how we're doing things differently. And because it did take more time and things are being done with less efficiency, that naturally leads to delays. So I want to thank the team at Hahn, Lozier & Parks for preparing and hosting this presentation for us today. And I'm sure that it is not only timely, but it's going to be very informative. So thanks to each of you for being here today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rob to begin the presentation.
Rob, I can't hear you. We'll give Rob a second. I don't know if others can't hear him, but I can't hear him. This is Aaron. Well, Rob, I'll give Rob a second to log on, and I'll introduce him while he's getting his microphone. Rob is the chair of our construction group, Hahn Lozier. He's been at Hahn Lozier for, I think, his entire career. He's got tremendous experience in construction issues and litigation issues. Also joining us today are Jeff Roush and Chad Van Arnhem. They're in our construction services division, and they help us deal with pricing on some of these claim issues and schedule impacts and extra work claims, and they can look at scope issues as well. So they joined us within the last couple of years to help expand the scope of services. And I have a list here of who's on. I know some of you have worked with them. I know a lot of you who are on today have worked with us, and we always appreciate your friendship and you're working with us. Rob, I'll try again. So up on the screen right now, you can see there's a link to our blog. This is the our construction law insight blog where we post. I know I have a couple articles up on there about some of these COVID issues, and Rob does as well, and Chad and other members of our team. So that's something you can check often if you want to get some of the latest advice. I want to move to the agenda, and I'll let Rob take over on the agenda slide. There he is. Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. Somehow I completely lost my audio connection, but I went to the computer. So thank you, Aaron, and welcome, everyone. On behalf of Hahn, Lozier & Parks and myself, we really appreciate the opportunity that to work with the OCA and to present here. Aaron, I don't know, did you have a chance to introduce the others on the panel?
I did, yep.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk about, as you can see on the screen, 5 separate things. I'm going to move quickly through mine so we can get to really the meat of the presentation with Aaron, Chad, and Jeff. We're going to talk about navigating the unknown impacts of COVID, sending out the required notices, key understanding and excusable compensable delay issues, ways to track and document delays, and prosecution of claims and upper tier defenses. I think you'll find it really informative. Aaron Hawk, who is behind the scenes for us and the director of our marketing group, is advancing slides. So Aaron, thank you. So in my part of the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about what to expect and what you should expect. And we're now 2 months into this. So I think a lot of you probably would say, well, I already kind of am seeing it, but I think what we're going to find and what we're starting to hear is it's only the tip of the iceberg. And just like I think with this virus itself, there is no one size fits all. Everybody, depending upon where their project is, depending on their contractual relationships, depending upon a multitude of factors, is having to navigate this situation. And every situation and every project is different. And part of what we want to do is recognize with you that a lot of those things are out of your control as contractors out in the field. But some of these things are inside of your control or within your control. And those are the things we hope we can help focus on and give you the best possible opportunity to come out of this pandemic in the best possible shape to move forward, hopefully to profitable third and fourth quarter this year. So Aaron, we can go to the next slide. What we're saying to our clients is you need to plan for the worst and you need to hope for the best, or at least better. And as most of you have probably seen, there's a number of forecasts coming out. The AIA index is pointing to a major downturn in our industry coming up. ABC chief economist is forecasting a steep decline. We just really don't know, I think, what to expect in the longer term. So we need to be prepared and do everything we can do internally, both with our business and our projects, to plan for the worst and obviously hope for the best. Aaron, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about these following things that you see on the screen. Immediate cash flow to your business, how to manage that, what you should be doing, shortage of reliable labor, supply chain problems, project cancellation and termination for convenience. These are important items to be considering, because while you may be thinking about project delays and cost impacts and time impacts with respect to that, we're seeing a lot of owners out there questioning whether or not they want to move forward, or if they want to move forward, what they want to do. And you need to be prepared for that. And we think it's important that you be prepared for that in the months to come. And then a little bit, I'm going to talk about claims just specifically with respect to infected workers. And I'm going to turn this over to Aaron, who's going to talk about more substantive impacts with respect to projects. And then he'll turn it over to Jeff and Chad. Hopefully, Aaron told you a little bit about the fact that we have a construction services group that's headed up by Jeff Roush, bring tremendous experience, field experience to our group with Chad, and we've found that invaluable for our clients. And I think you'll find their presentation today to be particularly valuable. So turning back to how do I protect my company now, let's talk about immediate cash flow issues. And I think 2 months into this, some of these issues are things that you've probably already considered or have already implemented, but I think they're worth going over and at least refreshing people on. First is, looking at, where are you going to get your cash? Should you consider drawing down on your line of credit if you haven't done it? Should we give it some consideration? Stimulus loan, PPP loan, and there's now, a new series of loans coming out. If you are eligible and have been eligible and have taken advantage of that, which hopefully you have, now the key is to think about maximizing forgiveness, right? Maximizing forgiveness, helping you conserve your cash, putting yourself in the best possible position. These issues are changing literally daily. We don't know what to expect from the Treasury. We have many clients who are evaluating, well, can I keep this money? Do I have issues with respect to my certification? Those are all issues that you should be looking at right now. You probably saw recently that they extended the give back deadline for another week past today. And those are issues that you should be evaluating to make sure that you're in full compliance because it literally is an evolving issue day to day. Most of you probably also saw that, it's been made clear now by the Treasury that loans over $2 million will be audited. So if you were provided a loan in excess of $2 million, you need to plan and understand that you're going to be audited, and you should be evaluating how you're using that money, your plan to use that money. Make sure that you're talking to your accountants. Where there's questions, there are a number of people who now I think are getting up to speed on this and can offer valuable advice. Look at our blog. We're constantly updating that. We have the people in our tax and business area giving presentations almost daily on the forgiveness issues and how to navigate it. And on the construction side, we're trying to make sure that that's available to you on our blog so you can see literally the minute-to-minute updates with respect to what the Treasury is doing. Goes without saying, aggressive collections, aged receivables. You need to focus. You're going to hear a lot from me about enhanced focus in these areas. And my point to a lot of our clients is, now's the time to implement it because we're in a crisis situation potentially. But these are long-term practices, frankly, that if you put them in place and you start to really focus on them, hopefully they carry over and they're just good business practices to maintain during the, even during normal, business operations. Extend payables, conserve cash. Look for areas where if I don't have to make that payment, I'm not going to make it. Where can I extend my payables? What are my options and opportunities there? Again, to conserve cash and reduce any potential on immediate cash flow. Okay, Aaron, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So getting down to the basics, how do we make money, right, in this business? We make money by making progress on projects. So that's where the focus has got to be. Most states now have opened up on different levels. Ohio, we've always been moving forward. Pennsylvania now is opened. A lot of our clients that are doing work in that region are back up and moving or getting ready to move. Focus on making progress on the projects that you have that are active and moving forward. Compliance with the CDC guidelines, local state orders with respect to the same. I put that in here, and we're going to talk about this a little bit at the end of my presentation, because what you don't want is you don't want hiccups. And what you really don't want, and frankly, one of the things that I continually remind our board of directors is we don't want our people getting sick, period. But what we really don't want is what you're seeing happening in some of these businesses where the entire workforce is suddenly becoming infected. That could be catastrophic to any of us. And so it's not just the fact of complying with those guidelines to avoid liability, which I'm going to talk about a little bit at the end of my program here, but it's making sure that you're doing that so that you're not going to have business interruptions yourself or putting yourself in danger. Enhanced tracking of receivables, pay application requirements, waivers, lien releases, making sure that you have, if you need to, putting a task force together or committees together, going through and on every project helping evaluate and enhance the efforts to make sure they're going in right, they're being paid timely. Pursue timely release or even early release of retention. Don't forget, if you're on a project and you're 65 or 70% complete, and for whatever reason, you're not having retention released as you go, even if the contract says that they have the right to hold it, doesn't hurt to ask. Go and see if there's a way to get early retention released so that you can improve your cash flow and move things forward. Timely pursuit of lien and bond rights. We say this time and time again to all of our clients. Every person on this panel, and I'm sure most of you, have stories. I have my own where we've had contractors who come to us and say, I really don't want to file a lien on this project. The owner said they're going to take care of me. And we beg them to do it and to explain you have to do it for business purposes. And at the end of the day, the one guy that gets paid 100 cents on the dollar is the guy who protected their lien rights, even if it meant an owner that wasn't real happy.
And Rob, let me just jump in and say we're
please.
doing a lien and bond claim presentation for the OCA and its members, I think May 18th, but Chris Runyon will confirm. So watch your emails for that. We'll be back to help.
Aaron?
If you're a little rusty on some of those issues, we'll be back to help make sure that those are all clear. Sorry, go on.
Right, no, that's great, Aaron. And my point here, our point here is, that may seem like, oh, that's just a typical, seminar that the OCA gives from time to time. it's really particularly important in today's age. I mean, you need to be doing everything to protect your bond and lien rights on every single project because, frankly, with the volatility that we're seeing with owners, with contractors, with subcontractors, with material suppliers, you need to protect yourself, even when in times past you felt comfortable working with those people or those entities. Strictly enforce your pay provisions. You know, we're fortunate here in Ohio, it's enforceable. We oftentimes get frustrated for our contracting clients when we're in other states like New York, where, you know, it doesn't do them any good because they're not enforceable. We're lucky that they are enforceable here. It's one way, one very important way that you can protect yourself. And it's another unique aspect of our area and this area of law. And I say that about lien rights too, because there are not many places, in fact, I can't think of any, in the law where you can actually file a lien on someone's property or on funds on a project without any due process whatsoever, without going to court, without anything. That is a unique right. It's there, and it's been there for 100 years to protect you, and it's something you should absolutely avail yourself to. Same goes with pay provisions. It's a tremendous tool. Make sure you have those in your contracts. Make sure that you're not paying where you haven't been paid, and make sure you're enforcing those. Even if you need to use, you know, you have a good contractor that you work with, but you use the current crisis as a fair excuse to say, look, I've got to manage cash flow right now. I'm going to do my best, but we are not going to pay anything until we are paid. Minimize scope creep. Now is a great time to remind your people in the field, we need to make sure that we are minimizing scope creep. We're not going to do things that are not part of our scope that we're not going to get compensated for. It's a good practice to have anyways. It's a good thing to have a process in place to avoid that and to train your project and your field people. But now is the time to do it and make sure that you're protecting yourself. Aaron, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So reliable labor and supply chain. A lot of these things are, I think, obvious. But again, I think we talk about just an enhanced focus on these things now can be critical. What I'm hearing is, long-term, we expect things to get back on track. But some companies are clearly better prepared than others with respect to managing these issues. And now is the time for you to make sure that you know which is which and understand where you potentially may be vulnerable, and where you are vulnerable, take steps to make sure you have a plan B and that you're protected. Workforce labor plans are critical. Putting a group together to look at those issues, put a plan in place, now is the time to do it, and it's a good practice moving forward generally. Scrutinize key suppliers. Are they able to meet your supply requirements? I'm telling people to demand visibility. Where they're crucial suppliers, demand visibility with respect to what their inventory is, what their production is, their ability to fulfill, to fulfill POs. And are you a priority with them? And if you're not a priority with them, then maybe you need to be thinking about, do I need to have another plan in place? Identify and implement alternative plans for key vulnerable suppliers. It's just the bottom line and something that you should be thinking about in today's environment. And that's just part of extending your supply network, period. Again, not a bad thing to carry over when times improve. Aaron, you can go to the next slide. So the bottom line here with respect to reliable labor and supply chain is implement a process to monitor labor and supply chain issues and predict and preempt shortages. And don't let things slide. Immediately investigate any slowdown, any rumor, any material supplier issues to make sure you don't get caught in a situation that ends up impacting you on a project that you want to keep moving forward for all the reasons that we've discussed. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So we're hearing a number of owners that are either looking at reducing scope, potentially thinking about canceling projects. it's important that you look at your backlog, look at what you are doing, identify owners that you believe might be vulnerable, owners that you're unfamiliar with, and where there are any concerns, demand adequate financial assurance. You have the right to make sure that they're going to move forward and they're going to pay you and be able to pay you. And by making that request, it doesn't have to be adversarial, and it shouldn't be. We are asking that you provide us with adequate assurance that you'll be able to fund this project. If you don't get the answers you want, then flags should go up that I potentially could have a problem. I may need to look at this further. I may need to talk to my counsel to understand what my rights are. But you need to be looking at those kinds of things, and now is the time. Value and understand your project suspension rights. Rights both upstream with the owner or the upstream contractor you're dealing with, and also what you may need to do with your downstream subcontractors. You want to anticipate those potential issues. Are there major orders that are being placed? Are they going to be orders that can be canceled if you're on a project where you think there's some vulnerability? Review your rights, the compensation for termination for convenience, and again, evaluate all those mitigation options, both with your suppliers and with your subcontractors, so that you can minimize any potential burn rate if it looks like a project is going to be canceled. Okay, Aaron, last slide for me. The last thing I'm going to talk about is just an effective claim management program, and this is going to extend into what Aaron's going to talk about and what Chad and Jeff are going to talk about, but I'm specifically going to talk about infected workers. What do I do, and what's my liability as a business if one of my workers gets infected with COVID-19? And what we're telling people is, one, it's not 100% clear right now, and it's going to probably vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But one thing for sure is having a program and a process in place to document and enforce all safety measures. Because where we can show that we have done everything that we were required to do and we have strictly enforced it, that will put you in the best possible position, one, as I said earlier, to avoid a mass problem with your workforce or in your office, and two, to avoid potential liability for an unsafe workplace. Part of that comes with making sure that you understand and implement the CDC guidelines and all the testing requirements, with respect to, job safety. Anybody infected, obviously, CDC right now is saying you got to contact trace and understand where it came from. They've got to be sent home. And you've got to make sure that you document all these things, that you fully comply to avoid potential liability down the road. Because I think what we really are seeing is that at the end of the day, if you can show that you've done those things and that you've gone the extra mile to make sure you had strict compliance, it's going to be your best avenue to defense, both with any kind of a spread within your business, but also with respect to liability to your business. Should you have a problem and people contract the virus. So with that, we're going to flip to the next slide, which is my final slide, which is make sure that you're looking at, particularly in Ohio, and you can look at our blog. We're linking to all these things, but you can go right on the website for the state of Ohio. These things are changing regularly. Make sure that you're understanding them, make sure you're posting them, and make sure you're complying with them. And with that, I think we're going to go to the next slide, Aaron, and I'm going to turn this over to Aaron Evenchik, who is going to talk about project impacts. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. You want to jump one more slide for me, Aaron? I want to thank Rob, one more beyond that even. The advice he gave, regardless of this COVID, is all good things to be thinking about daily. The OCA, I think we were all together, or a lot of you who are on this call, I think we were all together at the Hyatt in Columbus about 60 days ago when all of this first kind of came up, and we watched them setting up the Arnold Classic and the rest of the hall, only to find out just as we were leaving that that was being canceled, and the governor had made a decision that it's best not to import a lot of people from across the country and the world and risk that coming in. So we were all there at the beginning, and for those of you who, and I have the list, and I think a lot of you were at that conference, I questioned ODOT at that conference, said, what are we going to do if this hits and it starts to impact our project? So we've all been aware of it, and I know that's a lot of you guys do ODOT work, and I'm going to focus that way a little bit. We have been talking to different groups. I talked to the home builders yesterday, and for them, the concern is, can they get the homes built as quickly? And what about the end customer whose apartment lease might be up at a certain point and has got it all scheduled to get opening versus the type of projects that a lot of you do, some of the bridge projects and the highway projects that you do? What's the impact if those get extended out? So, you know, there's daily articles. Since I've been home for 60 days, one of the things I did is I subscribed to the Wall Street Journal, who's constantly writing about the impacts of this on business. And the provision that we all deal with all the time, and including in the CMS, it's the battle between force majeure and suspension of the project, and especially on some of the OFCC, the vertical projects. Force majeure meaning something happened, it's an act of God, it's beyond my control, it's beyond any of our controls, and under most force majeure provisions, you're entitled to more time. The game that we were seeing was a lot of contractors saying, well, we're waiting for the owner to suspend, because under the CMS, when the owner suspends the contract, not only do we get time, we get money. So we always have to look, whether it's an ODOT contract, an OFCC contract, or otherwise, to see what does the contract specifically say. Some states where there is no force majeure provision, it is implied by a law. Some of the, I'll pull back the curtain a little bit here, and some of the legal arguments, including a possibility of performance. One thing especially some of my general contractor clients are seeing from subcontractors, what appears to be excuses. Here's why I can't get out there. Everybody's at home, self-quarantining because they know a friend of a friend who may have had this, and so they've self-quarantined, or real excuses. They're home taking care of their families. Rob said, God forbid your whole workforce gets it because everybody's on the site and it blooms. That's a force majeure event. That's an act of God. Nothing you can do. Owners, we see, are resisting claims for time and money. They're willing to give time, but they're not willing to give money. And subcontractors, when subs refuse to show up and perform because they say, look, our guys are scared. And this is something we saw probably more 30 days ago than we're seeing today. One of the things I would always ask is, well, are you smarter than Amy Acton? Amy Acton says, at least 30 days ago, if you show up on the site and you're wearing your mask and you're wearing your gloves and you social distance, that you should be able to go on. And so people say, hey, sorry, force majeure, guys won't show up. Sorry, our crew won't show up. But you, general contractor, can pick up the phone and find a replacement crew. Well, it's hard to argue that they won't show up. They might not want to. They may be scared and say that the things she's suggesting may not be adequate, but that's always out there. And the other thing we've seen, and Chris are both on, both Chris is from OCA, they've been battling for you guys to try to limit some of the PPE requirements here, not because they want anyone, God forbid, getting sick, because they're trying to limit some of your expenditures. I think it was last week when Restart Ohio kicked out, you watch the requirement for masks switch from mandatory to recommended and back as it got bounced out throughout the week, probably largely because of the efforts of Chris and Chris, who were so adequately representing you guys. You want to jump to the next slide, please? So what are the impacts? What are the costs to you guys? First, social distancing, right? Everybody's supposed to be keeping their distance. It's clear a loss of efficiency claims, and these are claims that Chad and Jeff are going to talk to you about, how you calculate some of those claims, measured mild, even if you have to constantly washing your hands or sanitizing. Clients, if a project doesn't have bathrooms or tap waters and all you have is porta potties, now you got to bring out as well those hand washing stations. There's a cost to all that. Who's going to pay all those costs? It's one of the things that we've been battling with ODOT and others, is who has responsibility to pay for those costs under the contract. And everyone's going to get creative in some of those arguments. Obviously, if you can't get your crews there, if they are sick or quarantined, I do believe that is a legitimate force majeure excuse. If you're a general and somebody's whole crew is blown up and sick, you're going to, I think, have a hard time getting a court to say that they should have found others. Because what we're seeing in those instances are people are even raising rates of pay to try to get people, and they're struggling to get them. But again, these are all fights we're going to have or potentially have. You know, if you fail to follow some of these distancing issues, you risk OSHA enforcement. You also, as Rob said, risk liability. If you haven't enforced these things, and God forbid somebody gets sick, and they say, look, it's clear 10 people got sick, and the only thing they had in common is they all worked on the same project. It's because you, Mr. Owner, or Mr. General Contractor, Safety Manager, didn't enforce those things, and you now have risk. You better believe that Tim Misney and his ilk are going to go out there and try to make you pay. Let's jump to the next slide. So you've got to consider, one of the things I say, you've got to consider the impact of your claim on the entire project and all the parties. So most of you are dealing with ODOT claims or government claims. And in those instances, the government decides. Rob and I have been negotiating with a government entity for a client here, and you know, it's almost easier on a private matter where somebody's got to actually pull the cash out of their pocket. On these public matters, they just don't care. It's going to be our way or the highway because that's what we said. And so that's hard. One of the things we've seen is they argue, look, the project just doesn't have contingency funds to pay for this. You've got to find a way to do that. And the other thing that now we're really seeing with the cuts from the government yesterday is they lack the revenue to pay for these things. We know the state of Ohio, the General Assembly, cut, I think, $750 million. So you've got to watch for all of those things. Another thing that we're pushing for in those instances, well, if you don't have the money, maybe terminate the project for convenience. Pay us for what's in place right now. Or if it can't be done safely, say, look, terminate this for convenience now. If you're working on some project where people all have to be very close together, some kind of piping project, and we can't do it safely, terminate us for convenience and wait till things are safe. Let's jump to the next one. The next one really deals with private projects, and I know that's not as much the OCA focus, but look, on a private project, you got a lot more parties. You have the lenders, you have the owners, you have the future tenants who suddenly can't get in. The lenders who say, oh my gosh, this project, this apartment complex, nobody's renting right now, nobody's buying. Is the loan imbalance? Owner, you're going to have to put more equity in. All of these things for the general and the subs. Our performance has been slowed. Payment's been slowed. We are incurring more costs to perform the work. Who's going to absorb all that cost? And again, as I mentioned, we've lectured lots of industry groups, and I keep waiting for these industry groups to get together, and I pitch this and come up with a quote-unquote Corona compromise. What's the fair way for everyone to take pain? Because I talk to all of you on the phone. I know you're all willing to take on a little bit of the pain if you know everybody else is as well. What you don't want is for it to only be you who are absorbing those costs, right? When it's every man for himself, that's no good. We think that there should be some Corona compromise. So next slide. What happens if you can't perform due to this? Whether it's due to the safety issues or an inability to get a crew to perform, we can argue impossibility of performance under the contract, where it's after it's into an event arises rendering it's impossible. Might not be as applicable to an outside highway construction project. Again, if the entire crew gets sick, if the union, all get sick and nobody's able to show up, obviously that comes in there. Let's go to the next slide. The next one is impracticability. It's a long word of performance where there's risk of injury. It's disproportionate to what you're going to get. Even in those instances, you still have to make reasonable efforts to overcome those obstacles. And if despite those reasonable efforts, you cannot overcome the obstacles, then you can use impracticability of performance. So despite all the PPE, a crew refuses to perform and they have a legitimate reason, that might be impracticability. But once again, in that instance, I asked them, are you smarter than Amy Acton? If she says you can perform safely and do all these things, that's probably a limit. I mean, the poor woman is being protested at the State House, and she has to be defended by the governor. Let's jump to the next one. So impossibility of performance when it comes to government actions, the law there isn't quite as friendly. There's a line of cases in Ohio that the risk of government interference is on the party who contracted to render the performance. So that's out there. So let's jump 2 slides, Aaron. So what contract provisions, one more, please. What contract provisions come into play here? As I mentioned, force majeure, acts of God, suspension or delay caused by a project owner. We saw that more 30 days ago than I'm seeing that right now. Owners, I think people have gotten a little more comfortable with what it takes to go through this. But now you're having your project extended and not working as quickly. So you want to put those notices out there saying we're entitled to more time, we're entitled to more money. Even if you're not going to ask for more time, and I was just on the phone with somebody who said, I'm not going to ask for more money. Maybe I'll ask for more time. You've got to put those notices out there. Otherwise, you risk getting to the end of the project and the owner saying, well, you never told us you were running late. we're going to assess you with liquidated damages, right? That's the Dugan and Myers case. They failed to ever give notice to Ohio State that it was taking more time, and at the end they lost, even though the plan stunk, because they never gave that notice. And the contract says, we know ODOT contracts, we know OFCC contracts say, you must give notice within X days, otherwise you waive your rights, so don't do that. And who's going to share in the cost of additional PPE? If you're the general contractor and you're providing all of those things, you might want to tell your subcontractor, we're providing those, but we're going to reduce or deduct some of those costs from us. Let's jump to the next slide. Again, as I mentioned, and I want to make sure we get to Chad, so I'm going to run through some of the super quickly. Failure to give notice on a public contract, whether it's ODOT, OFCC, or any public contract in Ohio, means you may have waived your rights, so don't do that. Next slide. Best practice is always to send that request asking for that equitable adjustment of contract time or warning. And on the Ohio public contracts, as I've talked to many of you about, if you start without a change order or a CCD, you may have waived your rights. So you have to be careful in that instance. Let's jump to the next slide. You don't want to waive your rights. You always want to put it in order. And if you have somebody telling you that you've got to go anyways, you'll say, well, we're doing it under protest and reserve our right. Obviously, if there's some engineering issue, and that's a little beyond the scope of today's, but if there's an engineering or design issue and you don't own that, you've got to say, well, we can't proceed. We still need this to be done. We're happy to come back and do another seminar on that. But again, at the bottom of this, as Rob said, and that seminar for lienor bond claims, I was wrong on the date. It's Friday, May 22nd at 10 a.m. We'll all be back on this, and we hope to see a lot of you there. But you can make a lienor bond claim, unless, of course, you're the general contractor, in which you can't. But if you're sub-ever, you can make a lienor bond claim to get your money. So what type of delays are out there? I want to make sure next slide you've got access to the vocab. Most of you know this. An excusable delay is a delay that you're not responsible for. So COVID arguably is an excusable delay. If the government shuts down the project, it's an excusable delay. All of you on the phone want not just time, but you want money. So you want to argue that's excusable compensable delay. Under many contracts, including arguably an ODOT contract, they'll say, a COVID delay is an excusable non-compensable delay. You get time, but you don't get any money. You still have to give that prompt notice. Why? To avoid liquidated damages. On some contracts, you have to not only give the notice, but you've got to tie it to the critical path. So you've got to do a high level of analysis. Obviously, if you have a sub who's not showing up, generally that would be as a general contractor, your problem. That'd be considered a non-excusable delay. But if you have a sub who can't show up because their whole crew is sick, you want to make sure you give that notice to the owner so that the owner recognizes that, okay, well, this work can't go forward because they're having an excusable issue, a force majeure issue. Next slide. So, right, delays on the contractor side, if you have employees who can't perform because they're quarantined, if you can't get material, that's one of the things we're seeing right now, are if you had to order material from out of the country for a project, we have some shipping restrictions. You've got to document all those things and make sure it's clear in your documentation despite our best efforts, and you may even want to keep records of those efforts. Show the phone calls you made, show the emails you sent where you tried to mitigate and find replacements so that you could show we did everything possible that we could. We should be excused from this delay. We need more time. Next slide. What if you have an owner-caused delay? Well, owner suspension is what we're all praying for. Everybody, I have your list. Everybody on here wants the owner suspend because under the CMS, you get both time and money. If you're doing a federal project, I have the FAR quote in here. You get an increased cost of performance excluding profit. Okay, so what sort of things are you entitled to if we suspend? Cost of securing the site. If you've got idle equipment sitting out there because they don't tell you if it's an indefinite suspension or how long, if you got to maintain that site, demobbing and remobbing, and when you come back, you have escalated costs as well. Next slide. The private contracts, that's going to be driven by whatever you're entitled to under the contract. So let's jump to the next one. Slowdowns in work. So this is what I think a lot of you are seeing, caused by the social distancing. You're not getting the productivity you want. Sometimes you have to resequence because trades don't want to be stacked together, so you've got to move them around the site at different times, so you're deviating from your planned schedule, altering your workflow. In this instance, you're extending both your completion date and incurring costs. So you want to be able to give those costs. Next slide. So what do you have to do in those instances? Number one, that initial notice of delay. You've got to make sure you do that. I recommend you then have to follow the contract as well. And if you have to, give weekly updates, and when it's all done, give a summary of all those cost acts for time. If you get a claim, if you're the general and you get a claim from a lower tier, one of the things you want to do is share that claim up the contract chain, what we call that claim liquidation or claim pass-through. In that instance, oftentimes you're going to be a neutral claim conduit if you're the general contractor, and you're going to share that up, and when ODOT or OFCC give an answer, you're going to share it down and let things pass in between. So if you have a sub who can't perform, claim they can't perform, again, sometimes it's hard. You have to give that sub, hey, sub, until the owner agrees that your performance is excused due to this, you're in breach of the contract. And so these are hard things to say. We have drafted a ton of these letters, some for folks on the call right now, and we're happy to help go through these situations. They are so fact intensive. The only way to really do a full analysis is to walk through all the facts. Let's jump to the next slide. So again, what do you have to do? If you have an upper tier who suspends the project, you've got to make sure you give, that's a trigger to give notice. Or if you have a lower tier who can't be there, triggers to give notice as well. So what do you do to calculate your cost? I'm going to turn it over to Chad. I'm just looking. Chris sent an email. Is being designated an essential industry a change condition that would entitle a contractor to an avenue to recoup additional PPE costs and inefficiency? So, Chris, I'm going to tell you, it says a delay with no additional project costs be non-comparable to essential. We have argued that under the CMS, Amy Acton's orders are orders of a governmental entity that change how we function. You're right. Even if it doesn't impact our time, it costs us more money. We have argued and continue to help clients put on notice, ODOT and others, that we think these are compensable costs. So, Chad, I think I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, well, let's jump one more slide. Right, on public project, we're mediating. I had one more. Sorry, we had mediation, and then obviously we go to court. So how do you successful if you go back one more slide, go back, Aaron. How are you success? Number one, you have to align your claim theory, whatever it is you're arguing on why you're entitled, to what's permitted under the contract. You don't want to ask for something if the contract says specifically you're not entitled to it. You want to have clear and defensible measurements of those additional costs, good solid records of that. Cruddy records don't get you anywhere. You want to demonstrate your efforts to mitigate. I tried finding another supplier. I tried finding another contractor. I wasn't able to. And then, again, if in the end you don't get paid, especially if you're a sub, make that lien or bond claim. Chad and Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Aaron, and good morning, OCA participants. So this is Jeff Roush speaking, and both myself and Chad, years of on-site project management, company management, handling projects from start to finish, helping projects get to the finish line, and then helping projects that are off track, getting them back on track. And, the organizations we work with, the projects we work with, we've really grown up with the value of your job cost reports and other records on the project, essential things, schedules, weekly, monthly reviews, the schedules, and the real-time documentation that takes place all around the clock from the beginning to the end of the job. So, we've all been part of projects that have been very good and ones that have been bad. Projects that are very good, you've got the right documentation in place, you got coordination, you got attention to everything happening, and the projects that are bad can still turn out okay in terms of resolution because of having the right tracking and record keeping on a project. Chad and I are both going to talk about effective record keeping and ways to recognize, identify what your impacts are and the cost. And this is a whole different animal, COVID-19 related impacts. But there still are the other project impacts on the job. So you're getting double hammered with COVID items as well as other items on the projects. And so it really becomes more important now than ever to raise the bar on the record keeping program that companies have, because that having the best documentation, you'll be able to manage the delays, avoid and resolve them more in your favor. And the documentation is, we're going to talk about documenting before something happens, before COVID happened, documenting during the presence of whether it's a shutdown, suspension, or inefficiencies. And then on the downside, when it starts to wear off, there's going to be a lot of different trending and a lot of different scenarios to look at. And this is new ground. So the better the documentation, the better the chance to do the two things that Rob and Aaron have talked about, not just recovering time, but more so maximizing the recovery of the dollars it is costing to do the work. So from my standpoint, I want to just talk about some of the guiding steps and tips that are good for companies, good for the industry, and good for projects. And here on this on the slide, we've got 5 bullet points. Applicable on all projects, but now that we're in this current double jeopardy scenario with COVID and other delays, number 1, know your project schedule. What's the timeline? What's the sequence? What's the rotation plan? What are the days and milestones and end dates? If we know what the schedule says, and that schedule is not being able to be maintained, it helps improve that identification of the problem. What's the action that we're going to take place? And then, starting to track delays, impacts, and hindrances on the job. Number 2, know the cost system. What was budgeted? What are my actual costs? What are the production rates? And what are the variances with that information from a cost tracking standpoint? Knowing the costs are essential. It's all, it's a daily, it's a weekly, it's a month over month exercise. The documentation program, pull the trigger when things start happening, but continue it on over the course of the impacted period. I've seen where it may start, but it's got to continue on to see everybody talks about the curve, all the different conferences and press conferences and telecasts. What's the curve? Take it, track everything over the life of the impact on the project. Item number 4, having that regimented record keeping through the cost system, and certainly tailor cost codes. If things can be broken down for issues, time frames of the issues, it will make for a much easier extraction of that data, a better selling of the impact and the recovery of that. And the last item is, this is construction is about people. It's about teamwork, and we even in a time of issues, communication and working together has got to be out there so that the impacts you can try to mitigate those. And the biggest thing is impress upon everybody on the job, those that are witnessing it, those that don't believe it, those that are living it. The impact is real, and so speak to it that way. So if we can go to the next slide, Aaron. I bet you most Americans didn't know what PPE was until the last few months, but PPE in the construction industry, to me, is progress, performance, and execution. And because of the COVID issue, our PPE in this industry is being impacted, and the impact comes in different forms. There's the schedule impact. Can't do it. Extended, elongated, may even be accelerated. Because you have an end date to still make with reduced crews, reduced inefficiencies, you may have a directed or constructive acceleration. That's a whole different cost category that we can talk about that later on here. But there's delay and acceleration issues. Item number 2 kind of came up with what are we calling this COVID situation that's affecting us in the state, regionally, and across the country? These are unexpected project factors, and it comes down to the social distancing, the safety measures, the inefficiencies. It's not what anybody figured, and there are definitely specific costs attributable to the COVID matters that we want to make sure are documented. And unexpected, I use that word, it is entirely different. It's a different meaning. It's different than a differing site condition. It's different than an unforeseen site condition. And it's different than a change condition. These are situations that nobody expected, and it is that's why we want to make sure the documentation there to capture the cost. And the cost there are still direct cost components and indirect cost components. One of the things that on jobs, whether it's inside of a building site or out on a bridge job or a mainline paving job, who would have thought 2 months ago that your job superintendents, your assistant supers, project engineers were out, taking temperature, monitoring social distancing, making crew adjustments, both in size and location, because of the occurrences happening on the project. That's diluting your supervision, and I would encourage you to, in a situation like that, to record that, and if you're not, start doing it, because it's just not the trades guys. It's your frontline project supervision and project management. Go to the next slide, Aaron, please. So I know Aaron's talked about the delays on the owner side, and whether the project has been suspended or a project that was set to go, low bidder, you've got everything all teed up, you've done your pre-planning, everything is all set, but because of funding, or the owner may be backing off, the project didn't start, it's going to be pushed into a different time frame. So suspension and a project that doesn't start and the project that slows down, each of those have different hindrances and impacts on the job. Certainly the big item is, if a project is suspended, photo and video document the project, where it was left off, inventory things that were there, but really the items that project that hasn't started, that's a whole different set of documentation that we'd be glad to talk about on that. We all have had projects where the old CA holds up a job. The architect, engineer, the consultants, their turnaround time on a project that's progressing has issues with the timeliness of getting design changes out, maybe change orders, turnaround time on RFIs, payments, and stuff. I'm hearing now in the industry that it's even gone longer. So on a job where you've got CA issues, I'd keep a log on that, not just what the matters were, but what activities, what work, what subcontractors, what tasks are being affected by a slower CA because of the COVID-19. Big item that we're going to have Chad talk about here would be the labor inefficiencies that comes with the disruptions of the work. Disruptions because of the COVID requirements from a health and safety standpoint, from the availability of deliverables and materials and manpower, and the timely and efficient progress. There is a loss of productivity. The work processes are changing, and it's to the detriment of those that are doing it, and it's to the detriment of a cohesive and highly interdependent set of tasks and trades on a project. Go to the next slide, please, then, Aaron. I think we talked about most of the things here about procurement delays, later deliverables. So I'd like to do is take it to the next slide about cost tracking measures for quantifying the delay damages. So Chad, I'm going to give it to you here at this point.
All right. Hey, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. All right. So some things to consider, and Aaron actually touched on this earlier, but we'll talk a little bit more about what goes into those types of costs for delays. Now, this is particularly important when we're talking about a project that's underway, that's progressing, and now has suspended. So some of those costs that we did mention earlier include, man hours, expended materials, equipment, et cetera, that are used to actually secure and shut down the job site. So, recommending that you itemize those daily, that you create if you can, separate cost line items that are specific to those shutdown requirements, and obviously keep everything in a cost log. And make certain that daily reports do accurately reflect the work that is being done on the project, and certainly the work that differs from what was intended to be done. It's important to consider headcount. What's the total number of manpower that was available prior to, and what's the number of people and workforces that are available currently and after the issues of COVID-19. Jeff made mention of documenting the job site as it stands currently. For any change condition, and certainly for shutdown and securing the site, it's important to have accurate photo documents with date stamps that show the work that was changed. Consider demobilization costs, recording the material that's left off site, or brought off site, equipment that's brought off site, where is it taken to, what are the trucking costs, what are the storage costs. Again, another log or spreadsheet to track these cost conditions could certainly help organize the impacts. Some other project shutdown or securing of the job site may require additional security services, perhaps an on-site an on-site guard or patrol, or even additional security cameras. And then considering public safety factors, maintaining the traffic if we still contain or have a closure that's longer than expected. Those types of communications and certainly costs for those delays should all be captured. If we could go to the next slide, Aaron. Considering now some other costs that are outside of just the job shutdown itself, but considering remobilization costs, when the work is able to resume, how do we get everything back to the site, the transportation that's needed, resetting up the site, allocating those costs. We talked a little bit earlier about idle manpower, what work was progressing and what work on the scheduled critical path was moving forward that has now been delayed, and are those workers idled? Keeping track of those along with the schedule impact, knowing the start and finish date is extremely important. The same factors into idle equipment, whether it be company owned or if it's a rental equipment, if those are removed off the site or taken somewhere else, or if they remain on the site, now they're idled equipment for a certain period of time. Really, this all comes down to understanding the start date of the impact and the finish date of the impact. And, as we mentioned earlier, the strength of your project schedule and the fact that we need to make sure that those things are kept up to date. And I highly recommend, despite the COVID-19 issues, that a project schedule and critical path are analyzed weekly and kept up to date so that it can accurately reflect these particular change conditions, but any change conditions that may occur on the project. Next slide, Aaron.
So Chance talked about a shutdown job log spreadsheet as well as a demob log and spreadsheet. There are two other major items when a project is pushed out. You're going to be facing potentially and very likely material escalation and labor escalation. So when it comes to the folks may have had change order requests or claims in the past where the project gets pushed out into a time frame where the wage rates go up. So detail what the differentials are from the plan versus the expenditures during the higher wage rates period. And a simple spreadsheet works really well there. And on the material side, whether it's long lead major procurement items that now are taking either longer or you have to go to another source, what's the cost differential from what your original plan supplier was and what you had built into the bid and into your contract sum, and what will it cost now to secure that major procurement item, whether it's fabricated or if it's coming from overseas or even right within your vicinity, availability of steel, availability of major equipment. So material escalation, but then you've got your basic building materials, your market pricing. What is it costing for a cubic yard of concrete before COVID and now? What is it costing? The cost of lumber, shingles, fuel. Is there fuel is less expensive now, so but it's track the differentials, and this is again good use to have logs and spreadsheets so that you know it, and you can pursue those costs on your own by dealing with the project parties from a recovery of them because you track those costs. Go to the next slide, please. Loss of productivity. I did hear Aaron say the magic word, the measure mile approach, the measure mile. And that is really an assessment of the production of work in a less impacted or unimpacted period versus an impacted period. We have COVID impacts on the job. There may be other impacts on the job. So, through because of the social distancing side, individuals, crews, and the interdependent work of your subtrades. Or even operations, more on a heavy highway side. There are operations that are very interdependent. It may not be social distancing, but it's going to be COVID related because there may be staff, operator availability. Also, every day doing taking temperatures and such as that would affect daily progress. So I would encourage. On a loss of productivity, you've got LOP attributable to other delays and instances on a project, and separate that from that which is COVID. And if we need to create a checklist or a matrix of which is which, and if there's some crossover and some hybrid, need to be doing that. But really, it's the performance evaluation, and again, measure mile is. Demonstrating I was able to perform this amount of work, or either man hours per percent or man hours per dollar. I was performing at this rate. Now on this project with COVID, I wasn't able to do that. Here was what my production rate was. You're going to be pursuing through calculations, and it is accepted. It's an accepted methodology to recover because of LOP that way. So. Chad, if you can, talk about the LOP on the schedule and on the percentages a little bit then.
Yeah, you can advance to the next slide here. Really what Jeff was referring to is the establishment of a baseline. It's important to have the comparative figure of what your actual produced production rate was. And essentially, the comparison becomes your baseline to whatever your impeded production becomes. And that can be calculated based on a percent complete or a quantity of work. What percentage of work were you able to, put in place prior to COVID? How many yards of concrete was expected to be placed prior to COVID, or did you perform prior to COVID? And now what is it taking to do that same amount of work? And certainly you will probably find some sort of variance between your original baseline production rate and now your impeded production rate. You can advance to the next slide there, Aaron.
One thing I want to mention about loss of productivity is the use of the project schedule. The schedule has a described task, and it has a duration and a start and finish date. Where you've got work that there's an obvious impact, I would look at the schedule task and to say, I was able to get this percent of completion done in this many days, but because I was impacted, use your schedule. If you have an in-house person who's devoted to schedule, if you're using a third-party scheduler, this is one of the things to really, enhance the tracking of your schedule from a duration and from a percentage standpoint, more so than what you probably would be accustomed to of using that schedule. But because again, coming back to optimizing, maximizing the recoverability of your extra cost, and if labor inefficiency is most commonly the highest figure on a claim breakdown. So use the schedule to track this in man hours and work days along with your job cost system. On a suspended project, when a project does pick back up, operations and activities and the work that's been done that's been halted, you're going to go through another whole round of learning curve. You're not going to be able to go out there, jump right back on everything and continue on. So typically aren't looking at having a second learning curve. Definitely, use your daily report to track that. If we can, let's stop. Let's jump ahead here a couple slides to the unexpected project factors, Aaron. So on this, we talk about these items that are affecting the work. There are two types of impact costs. The first would be the discrete lost time because of social distancing and safety protocols, but then also the loss of productivity. So don't forget about lost time. If it's 15 minutes, it's a half an hour, it's an hour a day. That should be separated, itemized as a hard cost loss, along with the LOP. So if we can, let's go back to two more slides ahead then. And one more on the indirect cost. So Chad, if you can just talk about some of the, we've done a lot on direct labor, material, and equipment, but let's talk about some of the job site overhead costs here, Chad.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, you actually had hit on it a little bit earlier. We're seeing, superintendents and project staff members, now having to rearrange the planned work. There are certainly additional hours or different hours that can be tracked with our project staff members that are specifically related to managing now the issues that are a result of COVID-19. So we have a couple items here related specifically to superintendents, but it actually could be any project member that's directly related to the job site. Keeping a log, keeping a track daily of hours or time that is spent from a superintendent or a project engineer, whatever it may be, that's directly related to COVID. Think about a superintendent. Now, they had a certain work plan for a certain crew that was supposed to do X, Y, and Z. Now that work plan may have to be split up so that we can adhere to the social distancing suggested requirements here. So now you're splitting up that available in more areas so that you can keep that crew focused. Those are all additional steps beyond what we were, originally doing prior to COVID-19. So it's important for us to track those, and I highly recommend we do, a daily track of what time is spent that is somehow related to reprogressing or reorganizing the work that needs to happen due to COVID-19. If we could jump to the next slide there. So we did talk a little bit more about direct staff members related to project engineers, assistant PMs, again, quantifying numbers. But think about, are we now, having more discussions and meetings that are centered specifically around how we address the additional safety protocols and health measures that are in place? Does that mean that we are actually adding or supplementing our workforces from an overhead standpoint so that we can manage the additional tracking measures that need to be in place, whether it be more schedule updates or more frequent updates on constraint logs? Whatever the case may be, we may end up having additional staff members be part of trying to mitigate those damages, we certainly should be capturing those additional hours and costs so that we can pursue those as cost factors. Another item is to consider general conditions, right? This is not necessarily the people now, but more so the cost for us to do the physical work, or I'm sorry, to support the physical work that's not a direct material item that stays, in place on the project. If those are extended, we certainly have if those are delayed, we certainly have a right to seek extended compensation for those general conditions, progressing or having to be in place for a longer period of time. And then thinking about the staff members that aren't necessarily directly related to the project site itself, but are necessary to support that project and all projects moving forward. There are certainly ways of allocating our in-house overhead, right? We have certain people that are designated for accounting, for receivables, collections, whatever the case may be. Those people have some sort of allocated percentage base that relies on the projects as a cumulative. Those projects come in and we rely on those to help pay and allocate the cost for overhead. So we certainly have extended costs that go into play when it comes to costs related to overhead as well. You could jump to the next slide there. And that, obviously there's and I can let Jeff here wrap up this section, but there's certainly some good practices and techniques for at least making sure that we document the information. And really that's the basis of all of the, compensation that we're seeking is to have the right documentation, to have the right data collected, to have the right substantiation so that we can perform those calculations. And Jeff, I'll let you kind of close out with a couple of your comments here.
I think that's a good close there, Chad. If you go back to Mr. Aaron.
Well, we want to thank the OCA for hosting us. I want to thank everybody who was on and listened. Obviously, if you have questions beyond that, all of our contact information is here. I know many of you I've spoken to personally before, so you know how to reach us. We are happy to help in any way. We thank you for your time. We hope you have a good weekend despite the snow. And again, thank you to Chris for letting us do this. Thank you for my team and for our team and for everybody who's on, Chad and Jeff and Rob. And have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. And thank you, Aaron Hawk, as well, for running all this.